It's important to remember that Hitler wanted to create something which is called a totalitarian state. Hitler said in the middle of 1934, "I've won, the Nazi Party is the state." There's no difference between the Nazi Party and the laws of the land and the police and the judges. All the different things that we need that keep you and I free all became part of the Nazi Party. And that's called totalitarianism. Totalitarianism means that the state runs every single aspect of your life. By the state, we just mean the government and the people who work for the government. And the Nazi Party took over every single part of the government, and then that government tried to run every single aspect of people's lives. And that's called totalitarianism. You're not free to join whatever football club you want. You're not free to go to whatever school you like. You can't join whatever trade union you like. You can't work wherever you want. The government controls everything. Totalitarianism. You would still get it in some parts of the world today, like North Korea. North Korea was one of the few totalitarian states really left in the world. But in the 1930s, this actually seemed like a very modern idea. This seemed like the latest thinking. This seemed like the way to go, because you have to remember, at this stage in the 1930s, the world's in the middle of an economic depression, and millions are out of work all around the world. In places like Britain and France, the economies are struggling, and so totalitarianism actually seemed to some people, to many people in Germany, like the best way forward. There are different ways that Hitler tried to control every aspect of life. The first is one that he personally was not particularly interested in at all, and that was religion. Hitler didn't really believe in religion. Hitler didn't really believe in Christianity or Judaism. Well, certainly not Judaism. He hated the Jews, Hinduism, or any of. He just had no time for religion. He considered it all to be unscientific, superstitious nonsense. And he had a particular contempt for many Christian ideas, like love your neighbour as yourself. Hitler's basic approach to your neighbour was take him for all he's worth, fleece him, steal from him, and if you don't like the look of him, shoot him. Whereas Jesus preached love your neighbour like yourself and pray for your enemies. One of Hitler's famous statements when it came to loving your enemies, Hitler instead said, shoot him if he even looks at you funny. So Hitler's approach to life and Jesus' approach to life were really rather different, and so Hitler had very little time for Christianity. All the same, Germany was a church-going nation, a Christian nation, and so there was some attempt to try and control all the churches within Germany. Wasn't Hitler's idea. Some people came to him and said, okay, Hitler, how about we try and set up, a Reich church? And Hitler went along with that for a bit. But as you'll find out later on, this is where some opposition begins to pop up against Hitler. And because he had no real interest in the church, he got bored with it and let it go. At different times he felt, we'll have to deal with the churches sooner or later. But persecuting the church is something he never really got around to. Culture was much more important to Hitler. And by culture, you mean things like art, cinema, literature, books, music. The Nazis insisted on controlling whatever artists produced. They banned jazz music. The reason that they banned jazz music is because jazz music started in black communities in America, and so it was seen as coming from a racially inferior people. That's how Hitler perceived it, and so he banned jazz music. Books written by Jews or by communists were publicly burned. Now, this was not a case of students and sitting around in universities going, oh, no, please don't burn our books, Hitler. This was led by students. This movement of burning books was a student idea. Nazi students came up with this idea of burning books, getting rid of books, getting things out of university. And Goebbels, who was the head of propaganda, led these efforts, but he was backed up by Nazi students, and German students rounded up every book written by a communist or a Jew. The psychologist Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, who really came up with communism, they gathered these books and they burned them in these huge book burning events, and it was led by the young people. This wasn't old authoritarian father figures telling young people this is what you must read and this is what you shall not read. It was the young people who were saying this is the way of the future. The old-fashioned ideas were democracy, the old-fashioned ideas were law and order, but we're a new generation, and this new generation wants Nazism, this new generation wants totalitarianism. And so they participated in this. Homosexuality was not officially approved of by the Nazi state, even though many members of the SA were homosexuals themselves, and many members of the SS. The higher up ranks of those organizations, there were many homosexuals. Yet that went against some of the Nazis' key ideas, because the idea of the Nazi nation was a healthy nation where there were lots of babies being born. And homosexuality seemed to go against that. And so homosexuals were persecuted very harshly under the Nazis. The Olympic Games in 1936 were held by the Germans, and they were held to be a huge success. Interestingly, during 1936, very little persecution of the Jews. After 1936, it's allowed to grow again, showing that the persecution of the Jews was something that Hitler could control. Education, that's something that Hitler has a big investment in, because he wants to control the new generation. For a number of reasons. One is he knows he's going to die someday. He wants to leave his mark then on Germany. Secondly, it's the young people who are among his most enthusiastic supporters. Thirdly, and this is something that we'll have to really get our heads around. Back then, the larger your army, the more likely you were to win a war. Today, it's actually the best trained, best equipped army that tends to win. But then in the 1930s, it was a large army that you needed, and a large, healthy army, because you conscripted your army. You basically said if you're between 18 and 30 or 35, you're joining the army whether you like it or not, and we'll give you a gun, we'll teach you how to shoot it in roughly the right direction. Some of the better guys might get to drive tanks and some of the fun stuff, but generally your idea is, you're going to march towards the enemy and try and dodge the machine gun fire, and you needed to be relatively healthy to dodge machine gun fire. And you also needed a lot of soldiers to dodge machine gun fire, because machine guns tend to kill a lot of people, and you do need to have some left over. So Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, all of these countries want a large, healthy population, and they want healthy young people, and young people who are willing and ready to go to war. And so Hitler will encourage women to have as many babies as possible. But he is by far, he's not the only nation doing this. Britain's doing it, not to the same extent as the Nazis, but Britain and France were trying to give people tax breaks to have more children, because they needed to bring their population back up again. They also needed workers to run the factories. So the idea was we need a large, healthy population. Well, Hitler also wanted to control these young people, because they're the ones who were going to be conscripted. They're the ones who are likely to be fighting the war. And so he got rid of non-Nazi teachers, got rid of non-Nazi university professors. Teachers had to join the National Social Teachers League. In universities, it again was students who were quite often persecuting non-Nazi professors. This isn't so much that, that Hitler's giving these orders from on high, and the young people are going, oh no, you're persecuting us, you father figure, you old people know nothing. This was not how young people reacted in Germany. Young people tended to be very, very much for Hitler as the man of the future, as the guy with the latest thinking. And it tended to be the older people who looked at Hitler and thought, he's a bit of an upstart. It was the young people who were for him. Textbooks, of course, had to be rewritten to include Nazi political ideas, but also Nazi racial ideas. Again, they seem odd to us, but at the time, many people in other nations promoted similar ideas. The idea was of eugenics, eugenics. You need a healthy population. If there are unhealthy in your population, don't let them breed. Treat your population like cattle. If there's an unhealthy cow, you shoot it or you put it down. You don't let it breed. Treat your population the same way. Hitler, being Hitler, was more radical than other countries, and so he began to pass laws saying that certain people would not be allowed to breed in case they passed on ideas, or in case they passed on unhealthy genes, in case they made the population unhealthy. Um, and these ideas were promoted in school. That there were certain people who were just better than others. Those were the Aryans. We needed to get rid of the Jews in particular. The Jews were like a bacteria that the German people needed to get rid of. The German nation was a body, a healthy body, and the Jews were just like this nasty bacteria that had infected it and we needed to get rid of. Huge concentration on physical fitness in schools. Girls tended to be taught cookery, boys were taught science, maths. Hitler Youth became compulsory, and it indoctrinated boys and prepared them for war. And Allied soldiers, when they invaded Germany in 1944, were struck by how fanatical the younger people were, particularly those who ended up in the SS, and how some of them were, wounded German soldiers. Young wounded German soldiers were refusing blood transfusions from nurses trying to save their lives on D-Day because they were Allied nurses. There was a degree of this was a very successful education program. The reason that physical fitness was encouraged was because you don't need to be doing trigonometry or algebra if you're running towards machine gun fire. You do need to be fairly physically fit. So physical fitness was something that was encouraged. Don't get the idea that Hitler got his own way everywhere in Germany. There were plenty of villages, particularly Catholic villages, where people refused to join, where Catholic youth movements, people in those churches didn't want the young people. Catholic schools didn't want their children being taught Nazi ideas. There were areas that resisted and the Nazis never got control of. So it wasn't absolutely every area in Germany. But in the cities and in places that most of the German nation was going this direction. Not everywhere, but most places. Work. Nazis took control of the workers' lives. The German National Labour Service sent young people on public works. Hitler introduced conscription in 1936. So what that meant was you joined the labour movement or you joined the army, but you had a job. And you were leaving school knowing that Hitler had a job for you. And that was a big thing for a lot of young people. Before Hitler, you were going to leave school and what were you going to do? You were going to be unemployed at a time when there was very little unemployment benefit, at a time when there wasn't a massive entertainment industry. It was worrying and it was depressing. But then Hitler comes to power and he's got jobs for you. At a time when there is a lot of joblessness, at a time when there's massive unemployment, somebody comes along and says, I'm going to make you work. That actually sounds good. That actually sounds good to people. And so that was very important in giving him control over the German people. The German Labour Front, the DAF, controlled workers' conditions at work. Now, the DAF was really there because they got rid of the trade unions. The trade unions were there to protect workers' rights. Well, the German Labour Front then came in and it was controlled by the Nazis, but it made sure that the German managers couldn't make people work in unsafe conditions, and it made sure that workplaces were pleasant places to work in. And so it wasn't just that Hitler was giving you jobs. It looked as if Hitler actually cared about the conditions that you worked in. And then the Strength Through Joy movement was brought in. Strength Through Joy was important because it gave people holidays and it gave people leisure time. And this seems great. Here's Hitler and he gives us jobs and he makes those working conditions good. These are good places to work. We're not being sacked unfairly. They're making an effort to make sure the place is safe. And now Hitler's provided holidays for us through the Strength Through Joy movement, and he's doing his best to provide all sorts of entertainment and cinema, opera, all these things provided for people and comedians and all sorts of nights out at the theatre, and all organised by Hitler. Isn't this wonderful? Nobody's stepping back to think, let's look at what Hitler's controlling. He controls where I work. He controls where I spend my free time. He's got an interest in controlling my church. He controls what school my children go to. He controls what my child is taught. Hitler is being given a huge amount of control over every aspect of every person's life in Germany.